The secret World War II Panther tank in a pensioner's basement. History buffs. They often collect war memorabilia from both sides of a conflict. It could be anything ranging from knives to old medals to bits of uniform from battles long past. One of the most prominent and available sources for these collections is, of course, World War II. Most pieces have made their way into museums, but there are plenty of private collectors out there with secret bits of history that they call their own. None of these, however, went to quite the extent of one man in Germany who decided to keep a complete World War II German Panther tank in his basement. Tank warfare played a huge part in World War II, and the Panzerkampfwagen, or German armored fighting vehicle, emerged with multiple divisions during the war, the first of which was formed in 1935. The first model, the Panzer I Os. A, was built between July 1934 and June 1936. This version of the tank was extremely light, with only 13 millimeters of steel armor protection for its two-man crew, and two 7.92 millimeter machine guns, equipped with a maximum of 1525 rounds. Over the next few years, OS, F, B, C, and D models of the tank were also developed, although C never passed the prototype stage and only 40 of the D versions were produced. However, the B version was much more successful, and between August 1935 and June of 1937, 675 of these tanks were manufactured. The Panzer divisions were involved in many significant battles and incursions of the war, including the invasion of Poland, the battles with the British forces in North Africa, and in the early stages of the invasion of the Soviet Union. However, some historians contest that their influence was not as wide as popular opinion believes. For example, in his book Panzerkrieg, Peter McCarthy points out that of the 50 divisions that invaded Poland, only 6 were Panzers. Their greatest victory, though, was against the British and French in May of 1940. 7 Panzer divisions successfully smashed their way through the forest of Ardennes, terrain previously deemed impassable by the Allies. Their surprise attack trapped 1 million Allied soldiers, forcing British soldiers to evacuate at Dunkirk and the French to surrender. From there, tanks continued to play a significant part in the German war effort, coming to be known as Hitler's greatest leading instrument of warfare and undisputed masters of the battlefield. But it was only in 1943 that the most famous tank emerged, the Panther PFW-5 medium tank, that was modeled after the T-34 tank used by the Soviets. But despite its inspiration, the Panther V was a serious upgrade to the Soviet model when it hit the front lines, and it still holds the reputation of being one of the most significant and deadly vehicles in World War II. It first saw combat during the Kursk offensive, and its hull design with well-sloped armor meant that it was almost impossible to destroy head-on in battle. Alas, for the Germans, despite this superior design, the tide of war had already turned, and this new initiative came too late to change the outcome of World War II. But not everyone could let go of the legendary Panthers, as was the case of one German pensioner. His identity, kept secret under local privacy laws, the then 78-year-old German man, identified in the press only as Klaus-Dieter Flick, was found to have a whole stash of Nazi memorabilia in his villa when it was raided in 2015 after a tip-off. Something of a local legend, the former financier lived in the wealthy suburb of Kiel in Heikendorf, Germany, where he kept his famous tank, alongside other weapons, and an arsenal including a torpedo, an anti-aircraft 88mm flak gun, replica V-1 rocket, believe it or not, 70 assorted rifles and pistols, and more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition. The elderly man also reportedly held a hoard of Nazi memorabilia in the villa, including mannequins dressed in Nazi uniforms, swastika pendants, busts of Hitler, and an SS rune-shaped lamps. Overall, it didn't exactly give the impression that the man was simply interested in collecting these items for historical reverence. A month earlier, the German pensioner had found himself under scrutiny by Berlin prosecutors after officials were tipped off that there was a stash of stolen Nazi art in his villa. But that turned out to be the least of his problems when they realized what else his home contained. When his hoard was discovered, the Panther tank stood proudly among it, at 22 feet long and weighing 45 tons, the crown jewel of his collection. Incredibly, it seemed that the elderly millionaire had dedicated a good chunk of his money to creating his own pseudo-museum or Hall of Fame in his villa, as where the tank was kept was described as an underground hall of several levels. Known as an eccentric collector to the locals, sources claimed that he came across the tank in 1977 after a British arms collector reached out to him. He later began restoring the tank to its former glory in the 1980s. When this all came to light in 2015, it seems the authorities were the only ones surprised and the last to know of his collection. He had become a local legend, with many of his neighbors very familiar with his Panther tank. Eichendorff's mayor, Alexander Orth, was one such resident that wasn't surprised at all by the news. In fact, he told the press, quote, he was chugging around in that thing during the snow catastrophe in 1978, end quote. Imagine plodding through the snow and seeing a Panther tank just casually rolling towards you. Of course, upon discovering his hoard, the authorities immediately sprung into action to remove the collection from his home, which, funnily enough, was not a simple task. They had to call in the army, and it took 20 soldiers a total of 9 hours to remove the Panther tank from its basement home and secure it onto a flatbed truck. In order to achieve this, they had to use 2 armored recovery vehicles, specially built wooden ramps, and of course, physical labor from the soldiers themselves. It is said that the soldiers damaged the tank, and it had to be pulled out minus its tracks. Once it was finally safely on the truck, the authorities took it to the Putlos military training camp for safe storage. The battle to remove the tank was over, but the battle to find and legislate the bizarre collector was just about to begin. Immediately, the authorities claimed the man was violating the War Weapons Control Act, which is a German act that regulates the manufacturing, sales, and transport of weapons of war. But Klaus's lawyer argued that he wasn't in violation of this, given the tank and other weapons were fully deactivated, calling the official response disproportionate and claiming to have a certificate from 2005 that showed the tank had lost its weapons status and was therefore incapable of firing anything. It took 6 years, however, for the legal fight to reach its culmination. And in July of 2021 in Kiel, the case was finally heard, and lawyers began their deliberations over whether or not the man had violated Germany's War Weapons Control Act. They were aiming for a suspended sentence and a fine of up to 500,000 euros. That's approximately 489,000 American dollars. A lot of money to most of us. But if the 84-year-old man could afford a tank, this may not seem so large a figure to him. On August 2, 2021, the court reached its decision. The man was not fined the full amount, but was still on the hook for a huge 250,000 euros, or about 244,000 US dollars. They further ordered that the old man had to sell or donate the tank and anti-aircraft cannon to a museum or collector within the next 2 years, something which should be easy, as museums are always happy to receive additional memorabilia to their collections. According to his lawyer, a U.S. museum almost immediately expressed interest in purchasing the Panther tank, and a number of other collectors had approached them for other pieces or the weapons that were found in the home. No further news on what has happened to the tank has yet emerged, though rumor has it that it was finally purchased by a museum in the States, although it could actually still be in the Putlos camp itself. Let's hope, given his advanced age, he won't simply begin anew, and another mayor of Eichendorff will casually see a tank patrolling its streets.